I have killed things that would make your nightmares apply for a transfer. That is not boast. That is resume. I have gutted a Threnvar ridgeback with my bare claws before it finished its lunge. I have stood in a hurricane of shrapnel storms on the ash fields and walked out with my armor scorched and my pride intact. My people call me Fleet Marshal. My enemies, the few who survived meeting me, call me something that does not translate into your soft human syllables, and I am proud of that too. I am telling you this because I need you to understand what I was, before I tell you what I became. I sat in the council chamber 3 cycles ago believing, with the total certainty of a species that has never been wrong about this particular thing, that the Vrelkin were the deadliest sentient life in the known galaxy. We had the scars to prove it. We had the kill logs. We had 4,000 years of unbroken military dominance across 900 worlds, and not once, not a single time, had another species made us flinch. Then the doors of the chamber opened, and something small and slow and soft-skinned walked in wearing a uniform 2 sizes too plain for the weight it was about to put on this room. I did not know, in that moment, that I was about to become the most humbled predator in conquered history. I did not know that in a few short hours I would sit across from a creature built like a twig, look into eyes that had seen things my ancestors would have called impossible, and think, for the first time in 4,000 years of Relkin history, I am glad this one is not my enemy. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you who I was before Earth. My homeworld does not forgive weakness. It never has. Threnvar sits at 1.5 times standard gravity, wrapped in an atmosphere thick enough to carry sound for kilometers, and thin enough in oxygen that our lungs evolved 3 chambers just to keep up. Our sun is a bloated red thing that bathes the sky in the color of an open wound, and our nights are ruled by predators larger than any transport shuttle in the conquered fleet. We did not tame Threnvar. Nothing tames Threnvar. We survived it generation after generation, and the survivors bred true, and 4,000 years later, you get us, the Vrelkin. 2.5 meters at the shoulder, bone-plated along the spine and forearms, claws that can punch through Duraplate if we lean into the swing. We do not have soft edges. We were not built with any. By the time a Vrelkin child reaches maturity, they have already survived their first ridgeback hunt, their first ashfield storm, their first true winter, where the temperature drops low enough to crack stone. Those who do not survive are mourned, briefly, and then never spoken of again. Grief is a luxury Threnvar does not budget for. I say this without shame. I say this the way you might describe your own weather, or your own gravity, or the color of your own sun. It is simply what is. By the time I joined the conquered fleet, I had already commanded 3 campaigns against the Yith Collective, a species of hive-minded insectoids who thought numbers alone could win a war. I taught them otherwise. I have the claw scar across my left mandible to prove that lesson was not free, but I also have the Yith Collective's unconditional surrender in the conquered archives, so I consider it a fair trade. By the time I made Fleet Marshal, I had personally ended engagements against 6 species the conquered considered high threat. I had walked through the wreckage of worlds and left more wreckage behind me. My kill record was public. My reputation preceded me into every room I ever entered, and I liked it that way. Let me be honest about something else too, because this story does not work if I pretend otherwise. We looked down on the soft species. All of them. We were not cruel about it. We simply understood the universe as a hierarchy, and we understood our place at the top of it. Species that had not clawed their way out of a hostile world did not, in our estimation, understand what strength actually cost. They negotiated. They compromised. They built diplomacy where we built armor. I remember a joke my second-in-command used to make, back before all of this. You can always tell a soft-world species, she would say, flexing a clawed hand at whatever delegation was crossing the docking bay that week. They walk like the floor might still hurt them. We laughed at that joke for years. We were not laughing 3 cycles ago, when the floor of the council chamber met something that did not care in the slightest whether it hurt. The Etherian Concord Council chamber is built to intimidate. 900 meters of curved obsidian glass, ringed by delegate platforms stacked in tiers, lit from below by the cold blue fire of a captured star fragment suspended at the chamber's center. Every species that has ever sat in that room has felt, at some point, the specific vertigo of being very small beneath something very old. I did not feel small. I had never felt small in that room. I sat on the Vrelkin platform in the second tier, flanked by 2 junior officers, my claws resting loose and visible on the rail because I wanted every delegate in that chamber to remember exactly what they were sharing air with. The agenda that day was simple on paper. A new species, designated provisionally as Terran because apparently they called their own homeworld something as unassuming as Earth, was petitioning for conquered observer status. Low priority, housekeeping business, the kind of vote that usually finished before anyone had fully woken up. I remember scanning the pre-briefing dossier with the particular boredom of someone who has read 1,000 of these before. Temperate world, standard gravity, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, a species barely out of what the Concord classifies as adolescent spacefaring, meaning they'd only recently figured out how to leave their own solar system without dying on the way. Soft, I remember thinking. Another soft one. The Yeth ambassador, 3 seats down from me, made a small dismissive sound through his gill slits. Another herbivore delegation, he said. I give it 10 minutes. I did not disagree. Then the chamber doors opened and the delegation walked in. There were 4 of them. They wore matte gray uniforms with no ornamentation, no visible weapons, no armor plating of any kind. Their skin came in a scatter of different shades, which I noted with mild curiosity. Most species present a uniform pigment, evolved for a single environment. These 4 looked as though they'd been assembled from 4 different worlds and told to make it work. They were small, painfully small. The tallest of them barely cleared my chest plate, and I am not, by Vrelkin standards, an especially large specimen. At the front walked a female, dark-skinned, close-cropped hair, an unhurried economy of movement that I registered and in that first moment badly misread. Soft, I thought again. Slow gait. No visible aggression posture. This will indeed take 10 minutes. I want you to remember that thought because I am going to spend the rest of this story taking it apart, piece by piece. The same way she took apart every assumption I walked into that chamber with. She reached the central podium. She did not look up at the tiered platforms the way most new delegates do. That nervous cataloging glance that says I am trying to figure out who here can kill me. She looked straight ahead, set a data slate on the podium, and waited for the chamber to quiet. Captain Maria Okafor, she said, United Earth Defense Coalition, representing the sovereign world of Earth. Her voice did not shake. It did not rise to fill the room the way ours does, out of instinct, out of the ancient need to be heard over a Threnvar storm. She spoke quietly, and the chamber's acoustic dampeners had to work to catch it, and somehow that quiet was more unsettling than volume would have been. I noted, almost as an afterthought, the way she stood, weight evenly distributed, hands loose at her sides, not clasped, not fidgeting. A stillness that I associated, that every Vrelkin associates, with a very specific kind of creature, the kind that has stood in front of something that wanted to kill it and did not run. I filed that observation away and told myself it meant nothing. I would spend the next several hours discovering exactly how wrong that was. The preliminary questions went the way they always go. The Yeth ambassador asked about resource output. Okafor answered in numbers so unremarkable I nearly stopped listening. The Ophiran trade speaker asked about population figures. 8 billion, Okafor said, and a ripple of mild interest went through the chamber. Not because the number was large, by Concord standards it was middling, but because she said it the way you or I might mention the weather. Then the Jri overseer, a translucent, many-limbed thing perched on the platform across from mine, asked the question every Concord admission hearing eventually asks. Your species threat classification, the overseer said, voice clicking through the translator. Please describe your homeworld's primary environmental hazards. This is, I should explain, a standard courtesy question. Every species answers it differently, but the shape of the answer is always the same. A short list of local weather patterns, perhaps a predator species or 2, delivered with the mild self-deprecation of a species that has, for the most part, already conquered its own environment. Captain Okafor did not smile. She did not hesitate. Earth has 6 major climate zones, she said. Category 5 cyclonic storms with sustained winds over 250 kilometers per hour. Seismic events capable of leveling cities. Volcanic systems with eruption yields measured in gigatons. Roughly 3,700 species capable of killing a human on contact, 400 of which are considered a serious statistical risk to our settlements. The chamber did not react yet. 3,700 is not by itself an alarming number. Threnvar alone has visited worse. We are not the strongest species on our world, Okafor continued. We are not the fastest. We are not the toughest, the most venomous, or the best armored. On a raw survival metric, ranked purely by physical capability against every predator species we share Earth with, humans rank approximately 14th. 14th, I remember thinking. And I remember very clearly the specific quality of my own contempt in that moment. A warm, settled thing. The contempt of a species that has just been handed confirmation of everything it already believed. 14th. There it is. Soft, slow, ranked 14 deep on their own world, and here they are asking to sit at our table. I actually leaned back in my seat. I remember the exact motion, the specific, luxurious ease of a predator who believes the hard part of the conversation is over. Captain Okafor was not finished. We are ranked first, she said, in every single planetary conflict our species has ever entered against those other 13. The chamber went very quiet. We did not outfight the apex predators of our world, she said. We outthought them. We outorganized them. We outlasted them. Every species on that list that used to compete with us for territory is now extinct, endangered, or confined to reserves we built and maintained for them because we decided collectively that we preferred them alive. I felt something shift in my chest that I did not have a name for yet. It would take me the rest of the hearing to identify it. It was the first time in 4,000 years of Relkan history that I had felt the floor move under an assumption I did not know I was standing on. The overseer, to its credit, pressed further. It always does. That is what the position is for. Elaborate, it clicked. Your species' historical conflict record. Captain Okafor tapped her data slate. A hologram bloomed above the chamber floor. Soft blue light resolving into shapes that meant nothing to me yet, but would mean everything within the hour. I'll start with our planet, she said, not our wars, our planet. The hologram showed a spinning globe, blue and green and white, deceptively gentle from orbit. Sustained wind speeds during a Category 5 storm can strip roofs from reinforced structures and turn loose debris into projectiles capable of piercing vehicle armor. We get several of these a year. We do not evacuate our coastlines permanently. We rebuild. A short pause. A hard, punchy pause, the kind that means something is coming. A single hurricane releases more raw energy in 24 hours than every nuclear weapon ever detonated on our planet. Combined, several times over. I did not know what a nuclear weapon was yet. I would learn. I would come to understand in the space of about 4 minutes that this was possibly the least reassuring sentence anyone had ever chosen to open with. We call it Tuesday, she added. And it took me a full second to understand that this was not a translation error. It was not a mistranslated idiom. It was, I would later learn, something close to a very dry, very human joke, delivered with a perfectly flat expression, in front of a chamber of 900 alien delegates who had just been informed that a storm system capable of unmaking a city was, to this species, an unremarkable Tuesday. The Yeth ambassador's gill slits fluttered. I noted it. I noted my own spine, very slightly, stiffening against my seat. The hologram shifted. New shapes. Angular. Industrial. Okafor's voice did not change register, but the room's attention sharpened around her anyway. During what we call the 20th century, she said, a single conflict on our world killed approximately 70 to 85 million people over 6 years. We do not know the exact number. We stopped being able to count precisely partway through. She let that sit. That conflict is not considered our deadliest era of internal violence. It is our second. I felt the Ophiran trade speaker's antennae go rigid beside me. I felt more sharply my own claws curl slightly against the rail, an old, useless instinct, the body reaching for a weapon against a threat that was still just words in a chamber. We invented a weapon, Okafor continued, capable of releasing the energy of a small sun in a single detonation. We built enough of them, at the peak of our internal conflicts, to end multicellular life on our own world several times over. We call this period the Cold War. It lasted approximately 45 years. We survived it by mutual restraint, an agreement, unspoken and unenforced by any outside authority, that using the weapons meant no one survived to call it a victory. A pause. No other species enforced that restraint on us. We enforced it on ourselves. I did not fully understand in that moment the weight of what she had just said. That this was a species which had built the tools of its own total extinction, handed those tools to itself, and chosen collectively, generation after generation, not to use them. Every Vrelkin instinct I possessed told me this was impossible. Strength, on Threnvar, is used. A predator that builds a killing tool and does not use it is a predator that starves. I would spend the next several hours discovering that this restraint was not weakness at all. It was perhaps the most terrifying thing about them. The hologram shifted again. Smaller shapes now, individual profiles. Portraits, I would later understand. Faces. We are also, Okafor said, and here, for the first time, something in her voice did shift, not softer, but graver. A species capable of extraordinary individual acts of violence and extraordinary individual acts of protection, sometimes performed by the same person, sometimes minutes apart. We do not have a word that fully captures this contradiction. We have several words that try. She named a few: soldier, medic, sacrifice. The translator struggled with the last one, flagged it as carrying emotional weight beyond direct equivalent, which I have since learned is conquered translators speak for this species means something by this word that our dictionaries were not built to hold. Approximately 100 million of my species have died in organized conflict in the last century alone, she said. We are not proud of that number. We are not ashamed to state it either. It is simply what is. It is simply what is. I remember that phrase landing somewhere behind my sternum like a claw finding a gap in armor. I had used that exact construction, that exact resignation, to describe Threnvar's gravity, Threnvar's storms, Threnvar's brutal and unforgiving arithmetic of survival not 4 hours earlier in my own head in this very chamber. I had thought it made us unique. I had thought it made us hard in a way soft-world species could not comprehend. She used it to describe herself. The hologram shifted again, this time geological cross-sections, layers of ancient rock stacked and color-coded, spanning what I would later learn was a span of time so vast, my own species' recorded history barely registered as a smudge at the very edge of it. Approximately 250 million standard years ago, Okafor said, 96% of all life on our world was wiped out in a single extinction event. Our ancestors were not even mammals yet. They were small, and they hid, and they survived anyway. She let the number sit before continuing. It happened again. And again. 5 major extinction events that we know of. Each time, whatever was dominant before was erased, and whatever was small and adaptable enough to hide through it inherited what was left. You are telling me, I said slowly, that your species descends from things that survived by being insignificant. I'm telling you we descend from things that survived by refusing to stop existing, she said. There's a difference, Fleet Marshal. Insignificant things don't get to choose whether they keep adapting. Ours did every single time. The hologram shifted once more. An ocean now, dark and vast. A single silhouette descending into it, dwarfed by the black water around it. We cannot breathe underwater, Okafor said. We have no gills, no pressure adaptation, no natural defense against depths where the water alone would crush most of our vehicles. And yet humans have descended into the deepest trench on our planet, a pressure environment that exceeds anything found in most habitable star systems this Concord has catalogued, using nothing but engineering and the specific stubbornness of a species that has never once accepted "we cannot go there" as a permanent answer. I felt the Ophiran trade speaker shift audibly in his seat. Aquatic species do not, as a rule, appreciate hearing about surface dwellers casually visiting depths their own biology was built for. We have also, Okafor continued, and here her voice dropped slightly, taking on a texture I had not heard from her yet, left our own atmosphere entirely, on chemical combustion alone, before we had solved half the engineering problems that should have made it impossible. 3 of the first people who tried did not survive the attempt. We built a memorial to them. We did not stop trying. The hologram resolved into a final shape. A small metal object, no larger than a Vrelkin claw, planted in gray dust beneath a black sky. "That is the surface of our moon," she said. "We walked there 57 years after we invented the first machine capable of sustained flight. 57 years, Fleet Marshal. Your Concord's own historical record classifies that pace of technological acceleration as, and I am quoting the assessment your own delegation submitted to my government prior to this hearing, statistically anomalous for a species of Terran biological baseline. I had in fact read that assessment. I had not until this exact moment understood what it actually meant. We are slow compared to you," she said. "Slow, weak, thin-skinned, and, by your own scale, ranked 14th on our own world. And in the span of time it takes most spacefaring species in this Concord to domesticate their first alternate energy source. We went from throwing sharpened rocks at things that wanted to eat us, to standing on a second world entirely, looking back at the first one, small and blue and fragile, and deciding it was worth protecting for every single generation that would come after us." She looked around the chamber, slow and deliberate, meeting the gaze of delegation after delegation. "That," she said, "is the environmental hazard report you asked for. We are not the strongest thing that has ever existed. We are simply the thing that has never in 300,000 years agreed to stop." I did not speak again for several minutes. I did not trust what would come out of me if I did. The hologram shifted one final time. A single image. Grainy, low resolution, clearly ancient by the standards of the recording technology surrounding it. 2 figures, one reaching toward the other across open ground. No weapon visible, no cover, nothing but bare hands extended in a gesture I did not yet recognize. "We are not telling you this to frighten the chamber," Captain Okafor said. "We are telling you this because you asked what our environmental hazards are. And the honest answer is, we are one of them. We have always been one of the deadliest things on our own planet. We simply also decided, somewhere along the way, to be something else at the same time." The chamber was silent in a way I had never heard it be silent before. 900 delegates, 40-some species, and not one voice, not one clicking mandible, not one rustle of a wing case. I broke that silence myself. I did not mean to. It came out of me before I had decided to say anything at all. "What," I said, my own voice rough in a way I did not recognize, "is the highest recorded number of confirmed kills by a single member of your species in defense of others?" I do not know why that was the question that came out of me. Perhaps some old Vrelkin instinct, reaching for the one metric I understood, the one axis I could measure her against and know, finally, where I stood. Captain Okafor turned. For the first time since she'd entered the chamber, she looked directly up at the tiered platforms, and her eyes found mine, and held them. And I understood in that half-second that she had clocked exactly what kind of question I was asking and exactly what kind of answer I actually wanted. "I don't know the exact number, Fleet Marshal," she said. "We don't keep that statistic to celebrate it. We keep it so we remember what it cost the people who did it." She held my gaze a moment longer. "But I can tell you this," she said. "Every one of those people came home changed. Most of them would have traded every kill on that list to never have needed to make it in the first place." I had no answer for that. In 4,000 years of Vrelkin military tradition, I had never once heard a warrior speak of their kills as something to be traded away rather than displayed. We wear our kill marks. We carve them into our armor. We are proud of every single one. She was not proud. She was not ashamed either. She simply carried it, the way you carry a weight you did not choose but will not set down, because setting it down means someone else has to pick it up instead. I sat back in my seat. My claws had stopped curling against the rail. I did not notice when that happened. The vote was called an hour later. Provisional observer status, granted unanimously, with a speed that the jury overseer noted, dryly, as unprecedented for a species with a 14th place survival ranking. There was a small ripple of laughter through the chamber. I did not laugh. I was watching Captain Okafor step down from the podium, and I was doing something I had not done in longer than I could remember. I was reconsidering. She crossed the chamber floor toward the delegate exit, and I found myself standing, an impulsive motion, unplanned, the kind of thing a Fleet Marshal of my seniority does not typically do in front of a full council session. "Captain Okafor," I said. My voice carried further than I intended. The chamber's ambient noise dipped, several nearby delegates turning to watch. She stopped, looked up at me. She had to look up considerably, and did so without any of the deference or wariness I was accustomed to seeing from soft-world diplomats standing beneath a Vrelkin officer. "Fleet Marshal," she said, and inclined her head. Precisely the correct amount. No more, no less. Someone had briefed her on Vrelkin greeting protocol. I noted that too, and filed it under a growing stack of small observations that were rapidly demolishing everything I thought I knew about this species. "A question," I said, "if you will permit it." "Go ahead. You described your species as ranked 14th in raw physical capability on your own world," I said. "You then described a Cold War, a weapon capable of ending your species several times over, and restraint you enforced upon yourselves without any outside power compelling it. I do not understand how a species ranked 14th achieves the capacity to end itself several times over, and then chooses not to." It was, I admit, closer to a challenge than a question. Some old Vrelkin instinct, testing the shape of the thing in front of me, the way you'd press a claw against unfamiliar armor to find the seam. Captain Okafor did not bristle. She did not posture. She looked at me the way you might look at someone who had asked a genuinely good question and considered her answer with the same unhurried care she'd given everything else that day. "Rank 14 in claws, teeth, venom, speed, strength," she said. "First in tools, first in cooperation, first in the willingness to sacrifice individual advantage for collective survival, generation after generation, for about 300,000 years." She paused. "The gap between 14th and 1st isn't always physical, Fleet Marshal. Sometimes it's just, we decided to stop competing against each other long enough to outbuild everyone who was still competing against us. I did not have an immediate response to that. I have rarely, in my career, not had an immediate response to something. And the restraint," I said. "The weapon you built and did not use. That, I do not understand at all. On Threnvar, a warrior who forges a blade and does not draw it starves or worse is judged unworthy of the forging." Something shifted in her expression then. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. Older. "On Earth," she said, "we learned the hard way that some blades once drawn don't leave anyone standing to judge whether you were worthy of forging them. So we forge them anyway, because if only one side has the blade, that side decides everyone else's future. And then we agreed, as an entire species, never to draw them. Not out of weakness, Fleet Marshal." Her voice did not rise, but something in it hardened briefly, like metal finding its edge. "Out of the specific, deliberate strength it takes to hold something that could win you everything, and choose not to use it, every single day, for 80 years running, because you understand exactly what winning would cost." I felt that land somewhere I did not have a name for. I still do not have a good name for it. The closest word I have found in any conquered language is humbled. "That," I said slowly, "is not a soft trait." "No," she agreed. "It's just a quiet one. Your species built strength that's loud, Fleet Marshal. Mine built some that's loud and some that's very, very quiet. and we've spent our whole history arguing internally about which kind we should trust more. I extended my hand, not the Vrelkin greeting, which involves a controlled clasp of forearms designed, historically, to also double-check that the other party is not concealing a blade. I extended it the way I had seen humans do it on her delegation's entrance footage. Palm open, fingers loose. She looked at my hand. Clawed, plated, easily 3 times the mass of her own, and did not hesitate. She took it. Her grip was firm. Her hand disappeared almost entirely inside mine, and I was abruptly, uncomfortably aware of exactly how easy it would be for me to end this creature by accident, with a fraction of my strength in a fraction of a second. She did not appear to be thinking about that at all. She met my eyes instead, steady, unbothered. The way you'd shake hands with someone you respected, not someone you feared. That was the moment. I want to be precise about this because it is the moment the entire rest of my life pivoted around, and I did not fully understand it until much later. It was not the storm statistics. It was not the weapon capable of ending a world. It was not even the number. 85 million. A figure I still cannot hold in my head without something in my chest going still. It was that she was not afraid of me, and it was not because she underestimated what I could do to her. It was because she had already decided, a long time before she ever walked into that chamber, exactly what she was willing to risk in defense of the people standing behind her. And my claws, my 4,000 years of unbroken military dominance, my entire species' reputation as the deadliest predators the Concord had ever catalogued, simply did not change that calculation for her at all. I had built my entire identity around being the thing other species were afraid of. I had never once considered what it might mean to meet someone who had already made peace with that fear, and walked in anyway. We spoke for 3 hours that night, in a Concord lounge that neither of us had officially reserved, over drinks that neither of our biologies were technically supposed to be able to metabolize in the other's presence. She had a human beverage called whiskey that smelled to my chemoreceptors faintly of controlled decay, and I had a Vrelkin fermented ashfield reduction that she described, diplomatically, as smelling like a campfire had an argument with a battery. I told her about Threnvar, about the Ridgeback hunts, about the 3-chambered lungs, about the specific silence that falls over a Vrelkin settlement in the hour before a storm front hits, when every parent counts their children twice. She told me about a place called a hospital, about people who ran toward disasters instead of away from them, unarmed, carrying nothing but medical kits and the specific human stubbornness that apparently refuses to leave anyone behind if there is any conceivable way to bring them out alive. We have a saying, she told me, turning her glass slowly in one hand. No one left behind. Even the enemy? I asked. On Threnvar, that would be an alien concept. Worse than alien, it would be considered a betrayal of the pack, a squandering of resources on those who had chosen to stand against you. She was quiet for a moment. Depends on the war, she admitted. We're not perfect, Fleet Marshal. We've broken that promise plenty of times on both sides of plenty of lines. But we keep saying it, keep trying to live up to it, even after we fail. Maybe especially after we fail. She looked at me. I think that's the part that actually matters. Not that we always succeed. That we don't stop trying just because we've failed before. I told her then about my own failures. Something I had not spoken of in decades, not even to my own officers. A campaign against the Yith Collective, early in my command, where a miscalculation on my part had cost an entire strike team. I had carried their kill marks on my own armor ever since, not as trophies, but, I realized, saying it aloud for the first time, as something closer to what she had described about her own species' unnamed kill count. A weight I carried, so no one else had to. I did not know I was doing that, I admitted. I called it discipline. I called it remembering my mistakes so I would not repeat them. I did not have a word for what it actually was. We'd call that grief, she said gently, wearing it like that. Not letting yourself forget. Grief. On Threnvar, grief is a luxury we do not budget for. I had genuinely never considered that what I had built my entire command philosophy around, Precision, discipline, the refusal to ever again lose people under my command, might simply be grief, wearing a Vrelkin uniform because my culture had never given it any other acceptable shape to take. Your species does not forbid mourning, I said. It was not quite a question. No, she said. We'd fall apart without it, honestly. Half our best art, half our best laws, half the reason we ever agreed to stop pointing those weapons at each other. It all comes from mourning something first. Grief's not weakness where I come from, Fleet Marshal. It's just proof you loved something enough for it to cost you when it was gone. I sat with that for a long moment. Around us, the lounge had mostly emptied. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the low hum of the Concord station's night cycle beginning. The artificial dimming of lights that no species present actually needed, but that the Concord maintained anyway, out of some old accumulated instinct for rest. On Threnvar, I said finally, we say a warrior who weeps has already lost. I am beginning to suspect we have simply never had anyone strong enough to prove that wrong. She was quiet for a moment, turning her glass slowly, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something more private, less like a diplomat and more like a person. Can I tell you something I don't usually put in the official briefings? She asked. Please. My grandmother survived a famine, she said. Not a war, just bad years back to back on a continent that didn't have the infrastructure yet to move food fast enough to the people who needed it. She used to tell me, hunger doesn't care how brave you are. It doesn't care how strong. It just takes whoever it can and it doesn't apologize for it. She looked down at her glass. She survived. 2 of her siblings didn't. She carried that her whole life. Not as a weapon, not as a war story, just as something she never let herself forget, so that she'd spend the rest of her life making sure her own children never had to learn it the same way. Did she succeed? I asked. Yeah, Okafor said. I've never gone hungry a day in my life. Neither has my daughter. A small, tired smile. That's not nothing, Fleet Marshal. That's the whole point, actually. Every generation of us has been quietly trying to make sure the next one inherits a slightly less brutal version of the world we got handed. Sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we build a hurricane season and a Cold War in the same century and set ourselves back 20 years. But we keep trying. That's basically the entire human project if you boil it down far enough. A few billion people, spread across a few 100,000 years, all quietly trying to leave the next generation a little less to survive than they had to. I thought of my own progenitors, the Vrelkin Kreshmasters, the brutal unspoken triage of Threnvar's first winters, the children who were mourned briefly, and then never spoken of again, because grief was a resource we could not afford to spend. We do not do that, I admitted. Threnvar does not soften. Each generation is expected to survive exactly what the last one survived, no more, no less. We call it discipline. We call it keeping the species sharp. Does it work? She asked, not unkindly. It keeps us alive, I said. I am no longer certain that is the same thing as it working. She did not push further. She let the silence sit between us, comfortable in a way I was not accustomed to silence being. And after a moment I found myself continuing anyway, because something about the quiet made it easier, not harder, to keep talking. I have a daughter, I said. It was the first time I had mentioned her to anyone outside the compact in years. She is young, by our measure. She will face her first Ridgeback hunt within the cycle. I have spent every night since her birth wondering whether I have prepared her enough, and every night concluding that preparation is the only gift Threnvar allows me to give her. We do not have a word for what you just described. Making the world softer for the next one, deliberately, as a goal in itself. You could borrow ours, Okafor offered. We just call it hope. It's not complicated, it's just stubborn. Hope, I repeated. The word sat strangely in my mouth, unfamiliar, and yet I found I did not want to set it back down. She smiled at that, the first full smile I had seen from her all evening, and it changed her face entirely, softened something in it that I had, until that moment, only seen as flat and controlled and unreadable. Give it time, Fleet Marshal, she said. I've got a feeling you're about to meet a lot of things that prove you wrong. That's kind of what first contact is for. The Concord General Assembly convened 5 days later, a full session, all 900 delegates, called to formally ratify Earth's observer status and set the terms of the Concord's first extended contact protocol. It was, by tradition, a ceremonial session. Brief statements, formal votes. The kind of thing most fleet marshals attend out of obligation and leave the moment the mandatory portion concludes. I did not leave. When the floor opened for delegate remarks, I stood. I felt the room's attention shift toward me the way it always does, the particular quality of 900 delegates simultaneously deciding whether to brace for something. I understood why. Vrelkin fleet marshals do not typically volunteer remarks at ceremonial sessions. When we do, it is usually to object. I did not object. 5 cycles ago, I said, I sat in this chamber and watched a species I had already decided was soft walk through those doors. I want the record to reflect exactly how wrong I was, because I believe the Concord should know precisely what it is admitting. A ripple of surprise went through the tiers. I continued before it could settle into anything else. The Vrelkin have spent 4,000 years believing that strength, which cannot be measured in claws and armor plating, is not strength worth measuring. I have personally held that belief my entire career. I held it into this chamber 5 cycles ago, and I have not held it since. I looked, deliberately, toward the human observer platform where Captain Okafor sat, her expression carefully neutral, watching me with the same steady attention she had given the whole chamber during her own hearing. Earth is not a soft world, I said. Earth is the deadliest environment I have encountered a full account of in my entire career, populated by a species that could, by every metric available to us, have built an empire on raw destructive capacity alone, and instead built something else. Something quieter. Something, I am increasingly convinced, considerably harder to achieve. I let that sit a moment. I do not offer this as flattery. I do not offer it lightly. I am telling this chamber, as Fleet Marshal of the Vrelkin Compact, that I would be proud, genuinely, without qualification, to stand beside this species in any conflict the Concord ever faces. And I would advise every delegation in this room to hope very sincerely that we never give them reason to stand against us instead. The silence that followed was not the same silence as 5 cycles ago. That silence had been shock. This silence was something else, the specific quiet of an entire chamber recalibrating, in real time, exactly how much weight to put behind the small, unassuming species that had just been vouched for, without qualification, by the single most battle-proven officer in Concord military history. The Jri overseer broke it first. Fleet Marshal Dravorn. It clicked. That is, I believe, the first unqualified endorsement you have offered any species in your recorded career. It is, I agreed. I do not expect to need to make a second one soon. This species set the standard rather high. The Yeth ambassador, still visibly recovering from the reveal sequence 5 cycles prior, raised a mandible in something between disbelief and challenge. The Vrelkin do not offer trust lightly, Fleet Marshal. Some of us have spent decades earning a fraction of what you have just handed a species barely 3 months into Concord contact. What precisely did they do to earn it so quickly? It was a fair question. I did not answer it lightly. They did nothing to earn it quickly, I said. They earned it over 300,000 years on a world that gave them every reason to become exactly the kind of predator we are, and they chose over and over, generation after generation, to become something else instead. I did not hand them trust because they impressed me in an afternoon, Ambassador. I extended it because I finally understood what I was looking at, and I was ashamed it took me this long to see it. No one in the chamber spoke for a long moment. Then one by one, delegation after delegation began the low, murmured business of amending their own assessments, their own protocols, their own quiet internal recalculations of exactly how much room this small, unassuming species deserved at the table. I did not need to watch it happen. I already knew how it would end. Somewhere in the human observer platform, I saw Captain Okafor's mouth twitch, the smallest, most controlled almost smile I had seen from her since our conversation in the lounge, before she schooled it back into diplomatic neutrality. But she had heard me. And more importantly, I understood, watching the murmurs ripple outward across the tiers. the low, urgent conversations breaking out in a dozen translated languages at once. Every delegation in that chamber had heard me too. We shared a drink again, the night after the assembly session. Not in the Concord Lounge this time, but on the observation deck of the human delegation's transport ship. A small, unremarkable vessel that carried, I had come to understand, considerably more history behind it than its plain hull suggested. Earth hung in the viewport below us, blue and white and deceptively gentle, the way it had looked in that first hologram 5 cycles ago. I found myself looking at it differently now, not as a hazard classification, not as a statistic, as a home. The same way I looked at Threnvar's blood-red skies when I let myself. "You surprised the whole chamber today," Okafor said, handing me a glass of the same whiskey from before. I had, in the intervening days, developed something almost like a tolerance for the smell. "I surprised myself," I admitted. 4,000 years of Relkan doctrine, and it took one hearing to make me reconsider all of it. "For what it's worth," she said, "you surprised us too. Most first contacts don't go this well. Most species either try to conquer us or write us off as beneath notice, somewhere in the first month. I very nearly did the second," I said. 14th in raw survival ranking. I heard that number and decided the conversation was already over. And now? I considered the question properly, the way it deserved. "Now I think," I said slowly, "that ranking was the least interesting thing about your species, and I'm ashamed it took me this long to understand that. You did not survive Earth by being the strongest thing on it. You survived by becoming the thing every other predator eventually had to reckon with anyway. Not through claws, but through the simple, terrifying fact that you never, ever stopped adapting, and you never stopped choosing each other over yourselves." She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the slow blue curve of her homeworld. "You know," she said, "back on Earth we used to tell stories like this, first contact stories. Mostly we imagined it going the other way, something huge and terrible showing up, and us having to prove we deserved to keep existing. And now?" She looked at me and there was something warm in it, something that had not been there 5 cycles ago in that chamber, when she was still just a name on a dossier I hadn't bothered to fully read. "Now I think maybe the real story was always going to be simpler than that," she said. "2 species that scared the hell out of each other on paper, sitting on an observation deck, sharing a drink neither one of us should probably be able to stomach." I raised my glass. She raised hers. "To 14th place," I said. She laughed, an easy, genuine sound. Nothing like the careful, diplomatic stillness she'd worn in the chamber. "To 14th place," she agreed. And to the Fleet Marshal, who was smart enough to notice it didn't mean what he thought it meant, we drank. Below us, Earth turned slowly in the dark, wrapped in storms that could level cities and species that had learned, against every odd their own world had stacked against them, to build something worth protecting instead of simply something worth fearing. I have killed things that would make your nightmares apply for a transfer. I still believe that. It is still, in its own way, true. But I have also sat across from something built like a twig, with a grip that vanished inside my own claws, and felt, for the first time in 4,000 years of Relkan history, genuinely, quietly glad that it was not my enemy. That is not weakness. I understand that now. That is simply what it feels like to meet something that was never, in any way that mattered, soft at all. If this story hit different, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. I read every single one. Let me know what species you want to see humble themselves in front of Earth next. Like the video if the Fleet Marshal earned it. See you in the next one.